for this lecture. First off, I want to thank you, everybody who has come for tonight's lecture. We've been very excited about this new series, Explore Arkansas Art, and very happy to see you all as interested as we are. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our artist for this lecture. It is Marjorie Williams Smith. She is a Arkansas artist, of course, and she was born in Washington, D.C. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from Howard University and a Master in Fine Arts from the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. So fancy, fancy. We're so happy to have her with us tonight. And her main medium is silver point and aluminum point drawing medium. She'll go in depth about that in the lecture tonight. And without further ado, Marjorie, if you want to go ahead and start the lecture, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, let me share my screen and come over here, share, and let me do my presentation thing, slideshow. There you go. Can you see that? Have it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to make this presentation. And I'll just get started. Right. As Bridget said, I am from Washington, D.C. I was born there, went to school there. I was there during some very interesting times historically, because when I was, I think, a young child in elementary school, President Kennedy was in office. And so when he was assassinated and they brought his body back to Washington, they had a procession from the White House to the Capitol, and my parents took us down along Constitution Avenue, I believe, and saw the procession. So I got to see a number of historic things as I was growing up. And when it was time to go to college, I really wanted to go away because I'd been there all my life. And so I thought it would be cool to experience life somewhere else. And my parents said, no. So I went to Howard, but as the divine plan would have it, I was there when there were some very influential African-American artists that I was able to work with. So I was very blessed to work with Lois Jones and Jeff Donaldson and Frank Smith, who were, Frank Smith and Jeff Donaldson were a part of Afro-Cobra. And that was a very influential African-American art group based out of Chicago originally. But a number of the members taught at Howard. So it was a very good time to be there. And I was a major in graphic design, thinking I would be a graphic artist. This was way before computers or the internet. So everything was done by hand. And eventually, while I was there, I took a printmaking class, and I really fell in love with printmaking. And so about 3/4 of the way through my degree, I thought, I kind of like printmaking, but I don't know what I can do with this. So I thought, well, maybe I could teach. So I wound up being a double major. I took all the printmaking classes that they had and continued with the graphic design classes. And then when I went to Pratt, I was studying printmaking with the thought of teaching printmaking at the college level. So just to back up for a little bit, when I was a child, I really didn't think about art as a career. I thought about maybe being a doctor, something in the medical profession. And my mom would bring home coloring books for my brother and me to color with and so forth. And after I got in school, we had art projects. So after a while, art kind of took over from medicine. And it was fun, and I didn't have to take chemistry. And so I thought it was a really enjoyable pursuit. my parents really supported that. You know, some parents would say, you're not going to make any money. Why do you want to do this? And I just knew I'd be okay. And my parents really supported that. They didn't say, don't do it. They said, do it. Just do your best. So that's what I always believed, that I should do my best. I should work hard. So I went to Pratt for my master's degree. And so when I finished, of course, I didn't have any experience as a printmaking instructor. So trying to get a job as a printmaking instructor was didn't happen because I had no experience. You can't experience if you don't get hired. So so I went back to my first thing in college, which was graphic design. So I worked in New York for a number of years in graphic design. And I met my husband there, who is a printmaker. And we stayed there with the thought that we'd stay there for a while. And after a few years, he had gotten a call from someone in Arkansas about coming down to Little Rock to be artist in residence at the Arkansas Art Center. And when he first brought that idea to me, I said, no, I don't want to move to Little Rock, Arkansas. And he said, oh, but it'll just be for 1 year. And I thought, well, 1 year. And then he said, well, then we can move back. I said, okay, that'll work. And it perfect timing, again, one of those divine plans. I was expecting our first child. And so I said, well, this will be time for me to take off and I can, you know, relax a little bit. So we moved to Little Rock, and of course, we're still here. So once I got here and had time before the baby was born, I thought, well, maybe I can get back into my art. It really had been a while since I really did my own artwork that wasn't for a client. So I just had pencils and some paper, and I just started drawing whatever was close by. And I think for my birthday, my husband had given me some flowers. And by this time in October, we were here. Those flowers had dried up pretty well. So I thought, well, why don't I just draw a couple of them? And so that's what I did. I drew one, and then I drew another one, and then I drew another one. And then after a while, it just became a series. That was really what held my attention. And this particular drawing that you're looking at is a pencil drawing, and it's relatively small, about maybe 3 by 5. And it was just a way to reconnect with my drawing skills and just relax, just really relax. And it was in 1985. By that time, I was teaching graphic design at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. My husband was teaching there, also teaching printmaking. And this exhibition, The Fine Line, Drawing with Silver in America, came to Little Rock at the Art Center. And so I went up to just see what this was about. I would frequently go look at the shows. And I saw this show, and it was amazing. I had heard about Silver Point in art history class. I had never drawn with it. But there were some absolutely amazing art pieces in this show. And the coloring of the metal was such that it was different from graphite. It just had a different tonality. And so I thought, well, this might be perfect for the flowers that I was drawing. And so I thought I would try it. So I went to the art store. Of course, they did not have any Silver Point tools. So I fashioned a tool out of some jewelry that I had. And of course, I read this catalog cover to cover to learn what I could. And fortunately, it was a very good resource, because the curator really went into some of the history and some of the materials, talking about what the artists used to make their pieces. So that's how I learned. I just kind of taught myself based on reading this information. So what you see here is an example of some of the tools. Usually they'll call this Silver Point, but I think over the years, it has really become a generic term for other metals that are also used. You see on the left-hand side, 2 of my Silver Point tools. and they come in varying gauges, so you can get a very thin width or something a little bit heavier. And the more you press on the tool on your surface, it does not make the line darker. So the only way that you're going to get darker is to build lines like hatching and cross hatching to build the metal that you see in the drawing. On the right-hand side, you see copper, and in the middle is gold, and on the right-hand side is aluminum. So you'll also see people call this metal point. So it's kind of used interchangeably. If I'm talking about silver point, it is definitely silver, but metal point could be any variety of metals. So I started out primarily with silver, and then I started to experiment with some differing tools. So this is one of the earliest drawings that I created with some flowers. Again, they were dried, and just started with the silver point. And as I was trying to build value and shadow areas, I would just go in with hatched and crossed hatched lines. It didn't really work as well to get a range of values to handle the tool in the same way that you would handle graphite pencil. With pencil, you can go back and forth with your tool and build the value area. But with the silver, it didn't work that well for me, trying it that way. And when I saw some of the drawings at the Art Center show, I could see where they had built up the values with line. So that I had to kind of relearn how to draw, because I was so used to the pencil gradually building value differences and changing out the pencil for a different grade pencil. I couldn't do that with the silver. So I think as I got more familiar with the tools and just the approach to how I would want to draw with it, I got more confident. With this particular drawing, it's entitled In the Spirit, and in the flower bud, you see silver. In the leaves, there's some copper, and in the stem is pencil, and the kind of vague part at the bottom is actually smoke. So I saw where one of the artists in the Silver Point show did something with smoke, and I thought, oh my gosh, how did they do that? So I have to try that out. So I actually had a flame and got it so it would smoke, and then I put it near the drawing, and I thought, I could really lose this drawing in this process, but I thought, well, in the name of art, I'll try anything, and it worked out quite well. So, and I like the color that the smoke gave to it as well. That really was kind of warm, and I'm fascinated with how the metals change over a period of time. Now, this drawing was done in 1994, and after so many years, you're going to see that silver tarnish, just like your silverware you might have at home. It gets darker and kind of a dark, warm tone to it. The copper sometimes has a tendency to fade. I read where it would turn green. So I thought, oh, that would be perfect for leaves, right? Because it's going to go green. But I have not yet seen green. I get yellow, and I get the values to lighten. So it's kind of fugitive in a way. So I have to remember that and kind of work with that as I build the images. This one now is 2013. It's just relatively small, but now I'm really getting more used to extending my value range. And that was a problem early on, is trying to get enough contrast in values. And I have to remember that any place that I want to be light in value or to have a white highlight, I have to just leave it alone. When I'm doing the metal point drawings, I'm working on a surface that has a preparation on it. You cannot transfer a mark to just a blank piece of paper. So what I'm doing is going in and coating my page with acrylic gesso. Gouache would work. Watercolor is not quite, you don't have enough body there to get a good ground, but I use a gesso for most of my images. And after you put a mark down, you're not really going to be able to erase it. So I do a pencil drawing first, just to put the basic image in place. And then I can go in and lightly erase those lines out and go over it with the metal. So all of these values that you're seeing here, if I decided later that I didn't want that, well, tough. You just have to live with it because it's not going to erase. So for me, it's a relatively slow process, which is very relaxing, very meditative, and I can just build my values and just kind of take my time. This drawing, I really was pushing this value difference. So in the shadows, I was really able to get dark. And this was, at the time, this was what, 2009, it's the largest silver point that I did to that point. It's 30 by 22. It took many months to actually complete this image. In fact, half of it was completed and was starting to tarnish while I was still trying to finish the rest of the drawing. So I thought I really needed to speed up my drawing process so at least it would all look uniform in value. I was able to, over the years, get introduced to other silver point artists. I was working with some of my images, and I had a chance to meet a couple of silver point artists at the Arkansas Art Center when they did a workshop. And at the time they had the workshop, I had 2 small children, so I couldn't attend the workshop. But I asked the Art Center, well, will they take a lunch break? Because this was an all-day program. And they said, oh, sure. So during their lunch break, I went up and showed them some of my work and thought they could give me some advice. And they said, oh, just keep doing what you're doing. And I thought, okay. So over the years, I was able to get in touch with one of the other artists who was in that very first show that I saw. Her name is Susan Schwab, and she is very well known for metal point work. And she saw some of my images, and we just started communicating back and forth. And she started experimenting with different types of grounds for drawing. And so she tried black gesso. And when I saw one of her images, I thought, what in the world is that? How did you do that? She said, just go get some black gesso and that's it. So I didn't even know gesso came in black. So I coated my board with this black gesso, and I went in with the silver and aluminum, and it was like drawing in reverse, where when you're working on paper with your pencil, you're adding the value. But with this, I'm adding the light, and it's the reflection of the light on this metal that allows you to see these light values. So in the flower here, where you see this lightness on the petals, that's a buildup of the aluminum. And where you see very little light, it's just a little bit of aluminum on the surface. So that really intrigued me because the drawings had a whole different characteristic about them. They became a little bit more mysterious, maybe somber in some ways. This one is also done on the black gesso. So where I really wanted strong highlights, I would just add more and more of the metal, and areas that I didn't want any light at all, I just left it the black gesso. So I really started to think I had that figured out, and I thought, well, now what about bringing in some color? What might I do to get that? So with this particular image, I started with the black acrylic gesso, but then I started to use gold and copper and just kind of built the layers of metal on top of metal so that I could get the coloration of the daffodils. And in the background, I went in with a gouache, kind of a watercolor like wash in the background to give it some contrast. So, but again, that metal really pops because of the light shining on the image. And this one's a little more recent. I thought I would try, and I had tried earlier, a tinted background. So with this, I went in with watercolor and just kind of tinted my gesso. So then I can draw on with that and add some touches where I wanted to get darker. I was able to really build those values. and it's kind of fun. This one is also another one where I've gone in on that background with some gouache and really give it a strong contrast to the metal. And I really enjoyed working with this color in the background. And within the flower itself, I've got copper and I've got gold, aluminum, building on top of one another to get this a kind of a yellow, warm color that really contrasts nicely with that background, I think. And this is also one rather large 30 by 22. This drawing, one night I couldn't sleep, and sometimes when that happens, I get up and I sketch. And this was something that I had sketched in my sketchbook where I had a very dark flower against a light background with some dark kind of on the edges. And so I'm using both the black and the white gesso, but I have black gesso in the flower. And then on top of that, I could go back in and draw with the metals. And this was kind of fun. I like to experiment from time to time. It just kind of makes it fun for me and keeps it kind of fresh and adds maybe something else to what my images are about. This one added watercolor. So I had a bunch of daffodils in my studio, and they were almost about to, at the point where I need to get rid of them. So I put them all together and looked at them, and they just really were striking, particularly that shadow. So I went in, I drew it with the metal point, but then added watercolor and really built up the shadow areas to create the stems. So this was kind of fun. I hadn't really done anything with a lot of watercolor in the flowers in a metal point piece this size. So this was a fun experiment. And most of these images at this size that are 30 by 22, they will take at least a month, maybe a month and a half to actually finish a drawing. And this is the one that's behind Philip there. It's called The Creator Has a Master Plan. And there was this large area of Canis plants in MacArthur Park, right near the Arkansas Art Center, before they started all the renovation there. I don't know if these plants are still there or not, but these plants were taller than I am. And so when I went to take this photograph, it just seems like I was in this mass of Canis plants. And I just knew I had to make an image out of it. So I'm using that black background, aluminum, because I could get lots of light in it. And just really like the idea of, you know, there's no real intervention on these plants by people. I mean, they're really growing, they're growing tall, how they weave amongst that group and the shapes they create. That's nothing that, you know, a person could really just control. This is nature as it is. And I think it just speaks to how things can be if we really pay attention to the plan that Creator has for us. So, and I think, oh, one more image. This is my studio. It's kind of junky, and it's rather small. I know some artists have a very large space where they have tables, and I don't have that. I have a very, very limited area. So what you see here in terms of the chair with the red cloth, that's my cushion. And I usually work right at that easel, and all my other papers and tools and things are on my board, my drawing board to my right. And the jar with the M on it has lots of my other metal point tools, and it's kind of cozy. And you can see I have my radio there propped up on some other work, but I have music playing while I'm working. And I really enjoy working during the day. We have some skylights up there, and that gives me some daylight, which for the most part is good. Now there's about between noon and 2 o'clock, I get really strong sunlight on my easel, and then I have to take a break. And then I'll come back afterwards and work a little bit more. So that's my presentation. If you have some questions, or if you'd like me to go back and show anything else, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I actually have a couple questions, Marjorie.
Uh-huh.
And I'll just chime in here so that way whenever everyone goes along with their own questions, they don't feel as nervous. So I'll be the first to make a little
Okay.
question. Yes, I really love your groundwork with the black gesso, and then the aluminum on top of it.
Mhm.
I do have one question about that. So have you ever experimented with where the maybe adding your own color to the gesso? I know you talked a little bit about that
Mhm.
before, but have you ever tried to like kind of make a painting with that and then go back over it with the silver point, or have you tried that and you didn't really like it and then you're like, that's not for me. I
Uh-huh.
really like the drawing more than the painting.
Yeah, I had not tried that. I think because I'm a drawer,
Hmm.
and that what I which I did on the daffodils is probably about the extent of my painting. I've always liked watercolor, and it can be very transparent over the silver. So that silver or that metal point is important to me. So I wouldn't probably go in and paint with the gesso first and go back on it. Although I have had some ideas where I could maybe have more than one color in the background, but not necessarily a painting. But the metal is really what has taken my attention. I think one thing is because how it feels when I'm drawing. If you were to actually draw with it, if you draw with pencil on a particularly rough piece of paper, you're going to feel a certain drag on the page. You can almost get a sense of the texture of the paper as you're drawing. But with this acrylic gesso ground, which I sand before I actually start to draw, it's
Hmm.
very smooth. And when I'm drawing, it's just like I was drawing with butter. It's very smooth. I don't get the same textural feeling like I do when I'm working with pencil on regular paper. So
Oh, wow.
I don't have that tooth that you might see with say
Yeah,
charcoal
yeah, I know
paper.
what you're talking about. For some reason, I thought it would have more tooth
Well,
than not, because it's metal, right? And
yeah.
you would catch on everything.
Well,
Uh,
there it does have a very fine tooth. You'd almost have to get a magnifying glass, I guess, to see it. But I'm actually leaving particles of metal on the surface. And that's
wow.
what's making the drawing. So some people have asked, am I scratching into it? And I'm like, no, I'm not scratching. I'm just depositing the metal on that surface. So there is enough of an abrasiveness that the metal can be picked up. There's another artist that was in that fine line exhibition at the Art Center named Victor Coolbach, who loves a very rough surface. And he really goes in and his ground is very textured. He doesn't sand it. He loves to have that really kind of rough quality in the work. And he goes back over it oftentimes with watercolor. So it's very interesting. Contemporary artists are more and more embracing this medium, and they're experimenting. So we're seeing lots of variety of how the artists are using tools. So um, it's really kind of fun to see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's very interesting to learn about too. So I was just so excited, and your stories made it perfect. To be honest, I love
Thank
the
you.
stories behind it.
Yeah.
All right, now don't be shy, you guys. If you got a
Anybody else have a
question,
question? Yeah.
Marjorie, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Um, so I know you said that the metals can tarnish, the silver, for example, maybe the copper turning green. So there is no coating over your work, not something
No.
analogous to varnish, right? So are they always hung under glass to
Yes.
protect them?
Yes. I don't want any, I think they would easily pick up a mark if they should get bumped. I've made the mistake of maybe drawing with jewelry on and trying to, get dust off my page, and I leave a mark by mistake. So I take off all jewelry and just make sure that I'm not putting something there I don't want. But yeah, it's been very interesting. And I think I like the fact that um, differing metals are going to do different things. So the silver tarnishes and will get darker with age. The aluminum, I learned, is fugitive also. So it gets lighter as it ages. Now on the black background, it's going to get lighter. That's great, because then you'll be able to see that more and more as it ages. The gold doesn't tarnish. So on the black, it looks gold. Whereas if I put that same mark on a white page, it looks gray. That's very interesting. I don't quite know why that is. But so I get the colors of metals on that black background. And no, I don't spray them with fixative or anything like that, because I want that change to still be able to happen. Yeah. So it's kind of like the drawing is still alive in a way.
So what about lighting them? Is there any special considerations for how they should be lit?
Yeah, and that's a challenge for the people that show my work, is that the lighting would need to be at a certain angle where it can strike the piece in such a way that then the viewer really can get the full effect of what's going on. So I had an exhibition at the Arts and Science Center in Pine Bluff, and they did an excellent job with lighting everything so that all the metals that were on black really bounced off the page, and you could really see it. So that's I have a challenge also when I go to photograph them.
Right.
So I finally, a lot of times, as you can see on this slide, how the sun is hitting my easel, and that's a great time to take a picture, because that sunlight really bounces off the easel or off the work and shows the image very well. And that's a good time to take the shot.
I imagine they look a lot different in person than they do as a picture.
Yeah.
And so I want to see one in person. I imagine that they're almost holographic in a way.
Maybe we can get with our gallery manager and see if that can happen, right?
Well,
yeah,
that'd be cool.
right?
That would be cool. Yeah. I've done some Silver Point workshops with exhibitions, and there are some commercially prepared papers out there that you can use.
Ask you is like, what do you use? What do you?
Yeah, so that it's easy. You don't have to worry about trying to ground paper and let it dry and everything. There are some commercially made papers, and you can get them from Dick Blick, which is a supplier many artists are familiar with. And they also sell a very inexpensive stylus with silver. So it's relatively inexpensive. And the papers have a very fine clay coating over them. So it's a very fine finish on the front and back side, and a very easy way to get started with drawing with this material. So in workshops, I show some slides of Silver Point through the history of the medium back to, say, the Renaissance, where you had artists like Da Vinci and Michelangelo working with this material, doing their drawings, doing sketches and preliminaries for paintings. And then it kind of fell out of favor around 17th century and kind of reemerged in the 19th century. When they were kind of rediscovering the Renaissance, they were rediscovering materials they used, and Silver Point made a comeback. So I think right now is probably at the zenith of this comeback, where we've got a lot of contemporary artists experimenting with this, putting their take on it. It's not being handled necessarily in the way the Renaissance artists handled it. I think people are taking some risks, they're experimenting. And that's what's exciting to see. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question or a
Yes.
comment. Hi, Marjorie. This is June.
Hi.
A comment. It's just beautiful, exquisite. It's like visual poetry.
Oh, thank
And
you.
even to your subject matter, they're so fragile.
Yeah.
And in the process of hearing how you're speaking about it, it's even, it enhances that fragility of the thing.
Oh,
And
thank you.
that I loved how you said that it's alive. Even when you're done, it kind of keeps changing over time, the oxidation or whatever happens.
Yeah.
But I see on your drawing board that you're working upright.
Yes.
Is that correct? But
Yeah.
you're depositing the metal as you go, like you're not scratching it, but you're depositing the metal.
Right.
So does that fall down as you're working, or how
No,
you
no.
don't
Well,
work flat?
as I'm working now, if I'm working on something small, some of the ones that I've shown, like the one on the orange background, that relatively small piece, I can put it on a small board and hold it in my lap. And I'll tilt it against the drawing table you see there and just kind of work that way. But if it's something large like this page that's on the easel right now is 22 by 30. So that I do put up on the easel and it's upright. When I'm drawing, the metal is leaving small traces of itself on the surface, but it's not like charcoal. So you're not going to see any dust falling. It's not like your graphite where you might see dust falling. There's no dust. It's so minute. And it just stays on that surface. So that's why I say when it's like drawing with butter, because it's so smooth and it just leaves the trace of itself on the page. And in order to really get more value, I have to go over it and over it and over it. Then I have to be careful that I don't scratch the ground and leave a hole. Now that can happen. The commercially prepared papers are not very thick. That ground on there is very thin. And if you press too hard, you'll break through that ground and you can't cover that up. Now, when I first started drawing, I didn't realize that. And I thought, oh, I made a little hole. I would go in with my pencil and try to cover it up because the silver looked gray at the time. And I covered it up with a little gray pencil. And about 2 or 3 years later, I could see those gray marks versus my silver point marks because the silver point had tarnished and the graphite was still graphite. So I was like, well, that's not a good idea. So I had to be careful. With the page you see on my easel there, I have about 6 coats of gesso. So I've got a very substantial amount there. So I know if I should press a little hard, I've got more gesso underneath. And so I'm not worried about really getting to the paper. That gesso support is very well grounded. And I do sand it after I've done all the layers that I want to put on there. I like it better than the commercial paper because that commercial paper is so thin. So I feel like I have flexibility. And because it's a heavy weight, I'm working with a 300-pound watercolor paper, which is a very heavy weight. So if I should go in with some watercolor at some point, I'm not going to get any buckling with the page. It's just going to be flat. And so I have that flexibility.
Thank you.
That was a good question. Thank you. Other questions?
Well, Marjorie, I love your work and I really enjoyed your presentation and explaining how you do this. One thing that just struck me though, you are representing these very fragile dying flowers in metal, something very strong. It's almost a spiritual quality there. You're taking something so fragile and representing it in a very strong metal. I think it's just spectacular.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting you use the term spiritual because if you look at some of the titles of my pieces, they do have a spiritual connotation to them. The one behind you is titled "The Creator Has a Master Plan," and I was talking to someone recently about that title, and I said, well, originally it came from a song that I heard that was written by Pharoah Sanders back in 1969. It's a jazz piece, and there were vocals with it sung by Leon Thomas. I heard this back in college at Howard, and it was just intriguing because the melody of it is just kind of hypnotic, but the message was that the Creator has a master plan and it's love, and if we could just get our egos out of it and let the plan take over, I think, things would be different. And I know in my own life, like not wanting to move to Little Rock, and then it has proved to be the best move of my life. You have to go with how things are presented to you, and you just don't have control. And that's great. I'm glad things have come my way that I would not have planned because I didn't know about it. So that's what that represented to me, in the spirit, being in that moment where you can hear what you're being asked to do or how you're being led in your life. Fear not. There are moments when we are afraid. Surely through this past year, we've had moments where, we felt a little bit uncomfortable or worried about your safety, worrying about your family, and going back to scripture where it says, fear not. And fear not is in the Bible a lot. So I have to remind myself that. So a lot of these titles relate to my spiritual journey, but then putting it in metal, and as I said, when I saw that show, it was ethereal, some of these pieces, how this metal was used in such a way, you couldn't figure out how they even made that drawing. It was just so elusive. And I just felt that was the perfect tool. So it was another one of those moments where I was at the right place at the right time to see this. If I hadn't moved to Little Rock, I would never have seen this, So it was just a really worked out for me. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
But first I want to thank you because you've been such an inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
I was stuck in Little Rock. I mean, I like Little Rock, but I was stuck away from home for a long period of time, and with a lot of time on my hands. And I was browsing through the Arkansas Art Center, and there was a display there, and I had seen one also at another gallery in town.
Okay.
And seeing them both in the same day, I mean, I went out to the store, and art outfitters didn't have any styluses, but they did have the ground.
Okay.
So, but I took my earrings off, and until mine came in, I ordered one immediately. But I draw it, and when the session was over and we had to leave, I put it back in my ear. But anyway, and I attended 2 workshops, one with you and one with Susan Schwab. And
oh, great. Great. Yes.
Anyway, a couple of questions I have. One is about the pencil. And I was really struggling because what I was drawing at the time, really, I needed to have something drawn with pencil. There was a lot of erasing, lines and erase and erase. And I'm wondering, you said you used pencil first. Did you gesso it first and then draw in pencil, or did you draw it in pencil and then gesso over that?
No, I gesso it first. So, and that usually takes me about 3 or 4 days, just that gessoing process. So I will coat the entire page, let that dry, go back, maybe a few hours later, or maybe the next day I'll put another coat. So I'll go 6 coats. If I were to draw first with that and put gesso over it, it would be gone. That drawing would be gone. So I have to wait until that grounding is done, and then I'll sand it. So I'll take that board outside and sand it so that sanding doesn't get in my studio space. Then I'll come back in and then I'll draw, because then the surface is ready. And I'll try to make that drawing very light. So I've got to use something lighter than a 2B. So I may use a 2H or a 4H, something very, very soft, very light, so that if I didn't erase that line, it would eventually get covered up by the silver. And so I don't want to have to think about the form once I get to the metal. I want that form to be entirely there. Every aspect of it, maybe even where the shadows are going to go, I'll put some sort of indication so that I don't have to worry about the form. And then I can just have the fun with the metal, building up the values. And as I said, trying to leave the areas white that I want to stay the white of the page. So I may put a little indication in pencil, don't draw here, draw around it, and build it that way. And that's why it takes me a while, because I'm really having to think 2 and 3 steps ahead of where I'm going, so I don't make a mistake of where I'm working. And that's not every artist. You saw Susan Schwab's work, which is very abstract. It's non-representational. Different ways, different tools. She's not using a stylus necessarily sometimes. So but that's just the process that I've gotten used to for my images. So I would recommend trying that pencil drawing first, really deciding how you're wanting your form to be. And then once that's all in place, maybe even go back with your kneaded eraser and lighten that sketch just a little bit more. Just so you can still see it, but it won't necessarily impact your final drawing. And then you can draw with the metal right on top of that.
I've even used a light box, you know, done a drawing, but I don't put 6 coats on, so I can get by that. But sometimes that just doesn't work as well. You want a line that's more immediate. And I have one more quick question.
Sure.
So it's such a slow process. And, you know, I'm kind of eager to do a lot of things in a series. And anyway, it's just so slow. So how do you manage your time? I mean, do you do like one big one after another big one? And
well, now right now I'm getting ready for an exhibition that will be in El Dorado in June. So trying to work fast is what I'm trying to do. So you see this piece of paper on the easel right now. The top half of that it's been a week. The top half now has an image on it. So I've been really working fast, trying to hopefully get this done so I can maybe do 2 more after this for the show. But you know, you don't have to necessarily work the way I'm working. It depends on what you want your image to be. And you might take a look at silverpointweb.com. They have a small gallery of artists' works there. They also sell supplies from that website.
I bought some things from there.
Yeah, you can get your gold point from there. But you'll see some of the approaches other artists have taken. Some of it is very gestural, some of it is very loose. Some of it is very very representational, very controlled. And there are some that are, like I said, non-representational. So however you'd like to approach it, you don't have to spend a month on it. You could spend, a couple of hours if that's all you had, and you're satisfied with that image. Then that's fine. That's great. You would like for it to be something you're looking forward to working with. And if you
I always do. I always love the time that I have.
That it's, you want it to be, oh, I just hate this. You want it to feel, you want your time in the studio to be something that builds you up and makes you feel good about the process and your practice. And, there will be days when I don't do anything. Not right now because I'm getting ready for the show, but last year was kind of tough. I didn't do a lot of work. I had a number of family things that I had to encounter. And so I did not get to do a lot of work. I'm able now to get back into my space and get a little bit more done. I'm really excited. And as I said, this page on the easel right now has an image across the top half. So I do put some pictures of works in progress on Instagram, which feeds over to my fan page on Facebook. So you might check it out maybe first part of next week to see how this paper looks different than it does right now. Yeah. Other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering, if an artist, do you see the whole thing you want to do first, or does it change over time, or does it vary? Do you build on something that you had an idea of, or does it usually have it in your mind's eye before you start?
Sometimes I would say I have it in my mind's eye before I start, because that drawing that I put on in pencil has to be pretty resolved first. Now, things like adding smoke, I don't know where that's going to go. That's kind of an in the moment thing. The watercolor, sometimes it drips in a way that I didn't expect, so I'd go with it and make that work. But usually when it's just the silver, just the metal on the ground, I have it figured out in advance. The one I'm working on right now, and I said that top half has an image on it, I have an idea of where I want to go, but I also want to try to experiment with some things that I'm not sure how to work. So I'm wanting to go back in maybe with some graphite, some charcoal. The top half right now is done all in copper. I have some solutions that I can use that I will advance the color change of my copper. I want to see how that will impact it. So I'm going to do a lot of experimenting, and I'm not sure yet what the total outcome will be, but I have a pretty good idea. Yeah.
No, that's amazing because the light in those is just incredible. It's just that you can envision that ahead of time is, pretty amazing to me.
Well, thank you. I do take a number of my own photographs. As you can see in my picture of the studio here, I've got these dried flowers in that low right corner. Sometimes I'll set these up on my table and just draw directly from the rows there. But these groups of images like the Canis plants and the large things out in the field or whatever, I take my own photographs. And then I can use those photographs as a source for my drawing. And I know exactly where that's going to go. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed talking with y'all. I thank you all for inviting me to share this. And if you have any other questions about Metal Point or where you might find tools, you can leave me an email on my website. It's marjoriewilliams-smith.com. And I've got a web email attached with that, so you can leave me a message and I'll be happy to answer it if I can. So thank you.
All right, you guys. Thank
you,
you
Marjorie.
so
Thank
much,
Thank
Marjorie.
you. Thank you. Let me see if I can close my image there. Yeah. Click each.
Marjorie, you did wonderful. We appreciate everything that you've done.
Well, thank
And
you.
I'm probably, if you're interested in an online workshop, I don't know if the people that are on here would be interested in that, or if you would be interested in doing that. Because of COVID, everything that we do is online right now.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it would be, if you're able and willing,
Yeah.
it would be wonderful. If you just are absolutely don't.
Oh, no, I've not actually done a virtual workshop yet. I've done many in person, but I think it would be easy to translate that into a virtual experience. And the tools you could get from Dick Blick and order your supplies, and you would just get a little bit more information from me.
Like people that are interested in it, we could have the workshop and we can make sure they have the tools ready for them and make sure that you're equipped and ready to go. Even if we have to come out to Little Rock to get you ready, we are able and willing. So
thank you. Thank you.
We love what you do. We love your story. So we are super excited about what you have to offer us. And
thank you.
So thank you so much.
I appreciate your invitation, and I just hope everybody continues their interest in the arts, and that really helps support and encourage me.